Talk to them because they don't want them to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this call for papers relates to... Oh, sorry. I move that this debate be moved in short form.
The motion that the honourable member, all in favour say aye. Against say no. Aye. I believe the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Yeah,
I
move
item number 781 in my name.
The honourable member may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Just a point of order, Mr. President.
The Leader of the Opposition may want to remain.
Oh, I'm not going anywhere, Mr. President.
The Leader of the Government on a point of order.
Mr. President, the motion as drafted is directed to organisations including Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy, Transgrid, Essential Energy, and then the only government agency, then a number of government agencies, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, Treasury, and the Treasurer or Minister for Energy and Environment. Now, I don't quibble with a notice of motion which is directed to the government or government agencies. However, I do quibble with a notice of motion which is directed to agencies being Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy, Transgrid and Essential Energy, which are not government agencies and which should not fall within the ambit of a Standing Order 52 motion.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. President. This motion is entirely in order. Those of us who campaigned in the 2015 election and were debated in this House over days and over many hours the electricity transactions legislation will well remember that those opposite denied that they were selling the assets and made the point that the state government of New South Wales at all times remained the legal owner, that this was merely a 99-year lease. So if that's true, if what they told this parliament is correct, then in fact all of these bodies remain government assets, government bodies. It's simply that the operation and the right to the revenue has been contracted out, but they remain in public hands. And for them to stand at the dispatch box here and tell this chamber they lied 5 years ago, they defrauded this parliament as well as the electorate, well, I welcome that submission and I look forward to them coming clean on this transaction fraud, as we call it. But I don't think they will. And let's assume for the sake of argument that we were right and it really was a privatisation and they don't own the assets fully. They are still the 49.5% owner of most of those assets, leaving aside Transgrid. So they remain the legal owner of a substantial portion and they would have the right as the shareholder or the remaining owner to this information. In fact, they should possess the information in any case. But I don't think, Mr. President, you need to get to that second bit because I think the established legal position is that the government remains the owner of these assets. Even Transgrid, which has been 100% leased for 99 years, yes, we accept it's effectively a sale. It is a privatisation. It's an alienation of a public asset. But the technical legal point is they remain in government ownership. And so this point of order is spurious. It's just designed to waste time.
My friend is as eloquent as ever, but he misses the point. Exactly. It's not the status of the asset. It's whether the papers that are sought are government papers. That's the point at issue, and so he can seek to rewrite the history of 2015, or we could go back to the GenTrader transactions, which he seems to conveniently forget. But the question is whether the papers can be defined as government papers, and that's the essential question, because that's what a Standing Order 52 is related to.
To the point of order. Mr. President, it might assist you in making your ruling to to firstly distinguish between Essential Energy and the others, for which there is no dispute that Essential Energy is a government-controlled entity. It's a state-owned corporation, it's 100%. And that's the first point I make. Second point is in respect to the residual interest, which my colleague, the Honourable Adam Searle, referred to, Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy, Transgrid's a slightly different status, but Ausgrid and Endeavour Energy, the 49.5%. And just in direct reply to the Honourable Trevor Khan's submission, that 49.5% interest is held through what's called the Treasury Commercial Framework. And though that 49.5% interest is held in Treasury Holding Company interests as well. And therefore it is reasonable to assume from the purposes of the member who's moving this motion that they are in fact papers that are under the control, custody or possession of the government. And furthermore, in the event that they are not, then the appropriate thing to do would be for those agencies in complying with the order to point out that they don't have any such papers, if that's their view. It's really, in taking a point of order, what the minister is doing is saying it's outside, or his submission is that there is a procedural bar on the House asking for the papers. And he hasn't adduced precisely why the House hasn't got the power to ask for the papers. It's a totally different question as to whether or not the papers are under the control of the government. It's if the government and the executive government says there are no such papers that are returnable, that's one thing, and that will lead to a different course of action afterwards. But it is well within the established precedent of this House to ask for the papers of state-owned corporations, to ask for the papers of residual interest in state-owned corporations. We did this in respect to the WestConnex. There is precedent in that respect. There are some parallels to the situation in respect to iCare, for example, which is a slightly different category of state corporation. Point is, the key phrase is in the possession, custody or control here. And it's within our powers to seek that from state-owned corporations and interests in which we have a residual interest. Whether or not the papers can be returned or exist, separate question. But it's well within the power of this House to ask. And there is a distinction that should be drawn between the power to ask and the obligation to comply.
Yes. This will be the most substantial part of the debate.
My recollection was that 49 was the lease, and the 50%, 50.5% was retained. Am I wrong?
I think for the assistance, I think it works this way. I think essentially it's 100% of Transgrid and 51% of the remainder, 49% of the others.
5% of the others. And that's the crux of my submission to you, as eloquently as that is put, is that they do not have the control of those entities, notwithstanding they have a residual interest in them. The Standing Order 52 addressed to Treasury and DPC, you can't quibble with. But if in fact Transgrid is a perfect example, it's 100% privately owned. So how do you address an order to that entity? I accept the point made in relation to Essential Energy that it is a state-owned corporation, but in respect of the others, they are either 100% or less than a controlling interest. And the point made by the Honourable Trevor Khan is entirely right, that although the asset might remain with us, the entity that controls the delivery of the power that and the documents with they is less than a 50% interest, and in those circumstances they are not government entities.
Yep, thank you. I think I've heard enough. And can I take it? And the reason I've said that is it'll become obvious that your very last point to me was probably the most important point. Yes, as many judges have told me on many occasions when I appeared before them, quit while I'm ahead. Honourable members, this point of order raises an interesting issue. The question is whether Standing Order 52 can be used to require papers to be produced when a utility is partially government-owned and partially a private entity. Clearly, if an order is directed to a private corporation, any documents requested could not be said to be state papers, and as such, the Egan cases provide no authority to compel production. If a state agency has a small non-controlling interest in a private entity, I would expect the same principle would apply. This order seeks documents from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, the Treasury, the Treasurer and the Minister for Energy and Environment. Papers held by these agencies, even if they originated in a private corporation, are clearly required to be produced in the usual manner, and I note that the Minister has acknowledged that. However, the order is also directed to Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy and Transgrid. The New South Wales Government has partially leased out electricity network assets, but is still the effective owner of the assets, or at least retains significant interest in them. There are relevant acts the Electricity Network Assets Authorised Transaction Act 2015, the Electricity Retained Interest Corporation Act 2015 and the Electricity Supply Act. The Electricity Network Assets Authorised Transaction Act 2015 enables the transfer of electricity network assets to the private sector, provided they're transferred by lease, the initial term does not exceed 99 years, and the private sector's interest in the state electricity network asset, in different cases, around 50%. Under the Electricity Supply Act, the Minister has step-in rights and may issue a network administration order if the network operator's licence has been cancelled or the Minister is satisfied that the network operator has contravened a provision of this Act or the regulations or conditions of the licence. The Minister also has the power to conduct or require an audit to be conducted to determine whether a distributor, retailer or exempt person has complied with a Social Programs for Energy Code pursuant to Section 27 of Electricity Supply General Regulations 2014. The licensee must comply with certain conditions regarding pricing electricity services, and the Treasurer has responsibility for publishing reports of the Tribunal determinations under the Act. The Tribunal must provide an annual report to the Treasurer outlining the compliance of licences with conditions imposed under the Act, which must be tabled in both Houses of Parliament. The Minister may impose conditions on licensees in regard to indemnity, insurance and probity, and can take action under the Act for non-compliance. An independent audit must also be conducted at the end of every financial year to audit the licence holder's performance. Under Section 12.4, the licence holder must notify the Tribunal in accordance with any reporting manuals issued by the Tribunal of any significant changes it proposes to make to its asset management system or environmental management system. All of this indicates that the government has certain powers to direct the network operators to do certain things. This may or may not amount to enabling the government to require or direct the entities to provide the documents requested in the current motion by Mr Buttigieg. The entities are not government agencies or statutory authorities, but have some of the obligations of such agencies. Therefore, this is a difficult area and the position would appear to be ambiguous. I do not wish to restrict the rights of the House to agree to this motion if it wishes. In previous rulings, I've quoted page 38 of the 14th edition of Odge's Australian Senate practice that states where there is any doubt as to the interpretation of a rule or order, the President, as the independent impartial representative of the House, leans towards a ruling which preserves or strengthens the powers of the House and rights of all members rather than an interpretation that may weaken or lessen those powers and rights. If this motion is passed, the response in relation to documents currently only held by Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy and Transgrid is a matter for those entities to clarify with their own legal advice. I'm not prepared to rule that the motion is out of order. The debate on the motion can proceed. Mr Buttigieg. I amended it a bit.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank my colleagues and those opposite for participating in that point of order debate. What we've asked for here, and in the context of some of the previous arguments that were made against SO52s, the standard rollout ones, you know, it's tons and tons of resource, reams of paper, human resource cost, all the rest of it. This is quite actually a modest ask, Mr President. We are not asking for boxes upon boxes of SO52 returns. I'll go through them, Mr President. Point A, all current lease agreements between the government and Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy and Transgrid. Now, that can't be too hard, can it? We're talking about lease agreements. Now, how many boxes do you reckon that's going to fill up? 1/10 maybe? So the resource argument goes out the door. Similarly with point B, all documents including correspondence created since 1 January 2018 relating to any proposal or consideration of the further sale or lease of the government's ownership of Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy and Transgrid. These are matters of public interest, Mr President. It's been on the record that there's been active consideration of further sale of those assets, and I think this House should think that the public of New South Wales deserve to know whether or not the remaining portion of those assets are considered to be sold, because in fact, when the campaign was run by the government, they tried to propagate the argument that we're not actually selling it, we're only leasing the asset, we retain control of the asset, and we're leasing 49.5%. Well, if that's the case, we want to see the documents that may have considered the further sale, because that would constitute a breaking of election promise. Again, these are not voluminous asks, Mr President. We are asking for discussions that may have occurred around a sale. We're not talking about boxes upon boxes. It's a couple of documents at best. Now, the other point I want to raise too, which is point C, all documents including correspondence created since 1 January 2018 relating to any proposed consideration of the sale or lease of the government's ownership of Essential Energy, same thing. We just worded it differently, obviously, because that particular entity is 100% owned. And the last one, which is the point we're asking for from Ausgrid, Endeavour Energy, Transgrid about all suicide prevention policies, these are institutions which have experienced thousands upon thousands of job losses. We've got people there suffering psychological stress and job insecurity, and we have evidence that indicates that the suicide rate has gone up dramatically, and we want to know what those entities, who still have a responsibility to this government, are doing to prevent them. And it's more than reasonable. The old chestnut about reams and reams of papers and boxes doesn't cut it, and the House should pass it. It's in the public interest.
Time has expired. Any further speakers? The Honourable Mark Latham.
Mr Assistant President, One Nation opposes the motion mainly for the reason that these are predominantly private entities for which the House calling on documents, we might as well call on Coles and Woolworths and Bunnings and all sorts of transport companies. I'd love to see lots of the documents inside Qantas. Actually, love to, in many, many respects. But it's beyond the power and scope of this chamber. But I come back to the point I made earlier regarding the difference between sitting up there in a dusty room wading through boxes as opposed to making public policy and public interest statements. What we've just heard from the honourable member who's moved the motion in Part D is he has a concern about suiciding unemployed workers. Wouldn't you stand up and move the need for extra health resources provided by the New South Wales Government to save their lives?
Correct.
Instead, in this life and death issue, we're going to wait, 21 days to get the documents. Some of them will be privileged up there, have a look at them, get them unprivileged. And this is on a question of suicide? Seriously? The response to suicide is to call for documents as opposed to moving a motion, making a speech highlighting the problem, making representations to the Health Minister, the Mental Health Minister who's in this chamber. I haven't heard a single question of the Honourable Ronnie Taylor about this issue of workers dying. So I just can't believe the Labor Party, it just beggars belief, doesn't it? That a Labor Party could be concerned about unemployed workers dying and not raise a single question to the Minister just on this side of the table. Instead, it's a call for documents from private entities to see what they've got. Maybe they've got nothing, maybe they've got something. 21 days later you find out, and then you go through the process of looking around and then making a judgment about suicide. I mean, I just can't believe that this is the priority and the way a modern Labor Party would go about such an important issue. There's a single worker who is at risk of suicide, raise it in the chamber in a substantial way directly to the Minister. Surely.
Thank you. Any further speakers? The Minister?
It's another Standing Order 52. Mr Assistant President, and another attempt to, and this time, drag in agencies who have no, in respect of which the government has no control, to produce documents in their possession. This is a fishing expedition of the worst kind, and and I completely endorse the observations of the Honourable Mark Latham, is that there's no policy over there. It is we want to find a document so that we can commence a media campaign or some sort of level of criticism. Get out there, develop a policy. Tell us where the gap exists, and develop a policy. Well, that's the sort of stuff. That's the sort of stuff that they just don't know, have no capacity to do, and in fact they abused this place by saying this is all about us collecting documents to be placed up on level 8. This is an abuse of process, and in fact, it gives himself away, because as soon as you start saying we just want to see, well. What is this about? It is, we want to see what? What do we want to see? The reality is...
Order!
This is for more documents to be delivered to the Mookie wing, so that we can in fact be able to accumulate these documents, have someone go through it, and the allegation that there are not boxes and boxes, quite frankly, he does not know. He can't say that there are no documents. He comes here saying, here it is, give us all the documents, He does not know what that involves, and in fact he is now saying, the member is now saying, we want other non-government agencies to be involved in this grab for documents and to be expending taxpayers' money, consumers' money, because the dollars that we've got to spend on go on your electricity bill, my electricity bill, because that's the sort of expense that you want to put them to. So, quite frankly, we ought to be saying enough is enough in relation to this. There ought to be rules that you have to abide by before you come to this House asking for papers. And you've got to be able to establish that there is a prima facie case that makes the production of these papers necessary, and it is not just a fishing expedition like this is.
The Honourable Mark Pearson.
Thank you, Mr Assistant President. I was here in this House for the many, many nights that we dealt with these cognate bills, which went on forever, which basically was selling off our power to private companies. Now, energy and power is one of the essential necessities of life, and it was quite a shocking realisation that the government was willing to sell off to private companies a resource that is essential to life. Now, the Reverend Honourable Fred Nile, in an attempt to try and reduce the impact on the workers, sought a guarantee from the government that the workers would still be employed, and and a guarantee that the number of sackings or loss of employment would not occur for some considerable time. The government did not honour what the Reverend Honourable Fred Nile sought.
I'll hear the Minister on the point of order.
I'm happy to get a history lesson in relation to that, but this has to go to the motion about why it is necessary for these documents to be produced. I have to say that giving us a history lesson in what occurred at the time of the sale, is outside the ambit of the motion.
I'll just draw the members' attention back to the motion, if you don't mind.
So basically, the call for these documents to find out what happened. What happened as a consequence of the government's bills that were passed to all of the employees, to the supply of energy, to the affordability of energy, and coming back to the mental health issue. This is not a call for papers about people who are acutely mentally ill and are in danger of harming themselves. This goes to the very substance of the call. if we get a report, if we're seeking a report on the impact on the workers, including their mental health and including suicidality, which is actually listed in the call for papers, that is a call for papers. That is a call for papers about what is the consequence of the decision of the government and the passing of those bills. So I support the motion.
Mr. Deputy President.
Honourable Scott Farlow.
Tell me when you're not going to support one. Are there any rules?
Thank you, Mr.
Minister.
President. I rise to oppose the motion as put by the Honourable Mark Buttigieg in this House and associate myself with the comments of the Leader of the House in this chamber as well, in outlining that effectively this calls for documents from organisations which this government does not control. So, as has been referenced when it comes to Ausgrid and it comes to Endeavour Energy, they are not entities which the government controls. We actually control something quite separate to that. The Electricity Retained Interest Corporation Ausgrid. It's actually not a government-controlled entity. So there are actually separate entities that control the government's interests in these entities. So this is something the government can't possibly provide. And even in the debate we had before, the opposition acknowledged that, OK, Transgrid, take that away because, that isn't controlled by the government. But that's in this notice of motion. This notice of motion is so sloppy. How can government possibly act on what is outlined in this notice of motion? How can the government possibly come forward and provide documents the government has no control over? And if this House is going to waste half an hour in these sort of debates, I would recommend that we follow the lead of what the Honourable Mark Latham has said and we turn our minds to other things, which are perhaps, I see you walking in and saying true, probably not to my comments, but we turn our mind to matters of public policy, as the Honourable Damien Tudorhope has outlined. If we want to talk about mental health issues, we should be debating mental health issues rather than going on a fishing expedition, which effectively in this case is not even dipping your boat into the water because you just can't. So when we look at the motion that's moved by the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, we're not actually seeing this House at its best, and I will be opposing the motion on that grounds. And if we were to look at what this state has been able to achieve, as the Honourable Mark Pearson was talking about before, from the 99-year lease of our electricity assets. When we look at COVID and we look at the position New South Wales is in, thank God this House made that determination. Thank God, because we now have a $100 billion infrastructure pipeline, which is in part thanks to making those into productive assets, a productive investment that we can use in New South Wales to be able to get people back to work, get people back in jobs, and that is what is keeping our economy going. That is what is going to keep our economy going into the future. So trawling exercises like this are not going to help in New South Wales getting back to work. What's going to help in New South Wales getting back to work is by having proper debates in this House, as has been outlined by other members, the Leader of the House, the Honourable Mark Latham, actually debating public policy, actually debating how we can keep people in jobs and how we can create jobs, rather than going through a fishing expedition where this House can't possibly get documents that the Honourable Mark Buttigieg seeks to obtain.
Thank you. Any further members seeking the call? Honourable Mark Buttigieg in reply.
Mr. President, I'd just like to address some of the arguments that were put on that side of the House. The government may do well to actually read the pronouncements of their own ministers who were responsible for this at the time. And by way of example, the then Treasurer on the 26th of May 2015, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, highlighted that the government retains oversight in the second reading speech on the following legislation: Electricity Network Assets Authorised Transaction Bill 2015, the Electricity Retained Interest Corporations Bill 2015, and these are your leader's words, then Treasurer, will facilitate effective stewardship and oversight of the retained interest of the state in Ausgrid and Endeavour Energy. Now that's not ownership, is it? That's got nothing to do. You've got nothing to do with these places. We want the people of New South Wales to have access to lease documents, discussions about potential sales and suicide prevention policies, and these clowns tell us that they don't have anything to do with them, just directly contradicting,
I'll just resume your seat. I'll hear Honourable Wes Fang on the point of order.
Point of order, Mr Acting President. The member is reflecting on a number of members of this House by using that term, and I'd ask you, A, to demand he withdraw it, B, that he issues an apology to this side of the House.
I don't think there's any point of order there. I'm not going to ask him to withdraw that, and I don't think he directed at any particular individual in the chamber. He may continue.
Thank you, Mr President. I'll go on. Through these corporations, the state retains effective stewardship and oversight. On 27th of May, you might remember this bloke, the Honourable Mike Baird reiterated in his speech regarding electricity network assets. What is important in this legislation is that the government will undertake a 99-year lease of 49% of the networks. It will continue to hold at least a 51% interest in the network. The state retains ownership of the assets. There will be new step-in rights and stronger enforcement powers for the Energy Minister and tougher penalties. What message do you think these ministers were trying to perpetrate to the people of New South Wales? They were trying to say, we're not really selling it, we're leasing it so we can get the money, we'll retain control. Now, on the issue of suicides, Mr President, this government has been pleaded with, the Premier's been pleaded with to reduce youth suicide. Now, we're asking for what strategies these entities, which the government still have an interest in, have done about it, because the suicide rate's gone up dramatically. We have reporting to show that that's...
Time. The member's time has expired.
SO52 should be supported.
Thank you. Okay, the question is that of the motion of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg be agreed to. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? No. I think the noes have it.
The ayes have it.
Division required. Ring the bell. Might be 6, I think, is it? I could be.
Yes, I know.
780.
When I ruled in judgment.
Oh, why not? I've got the power to do it, haven't I? I think.
No, look, hang on, switch that on. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Would the ayes please stand? I appoint as tellers for the ayes the opposition whip and deputy opposition whip. Thank you. Would the ayes please resume your seats? Thank you. Would the noes please stand? I appoint as tellers for the noes the government whip and deputy government whip. Susan.
There's quite a quantity of water up there. Yeah, I don't know what it's about. It's very dry up there. I don't know what it's about. Some kind of siege mentality going on up there. Yeah, they're preppers. There's a bunch of preppers. Got the water, got the lolly. They've probably got the baked beans and the guns in the back section.
Thank you. Yes. Would the noes please resume your seats? There being 20 ayes and 18 noes, the question is resolved in the affirmative. Unlock the doors.